Jennifer Dugan.
And were you...
Formerly Tony, sorry.
And so you now go by...
Spell your last name.
Dugan.
And back in 2017, April of 2017, you went by Jennifer Tony?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that Tony?
Yes, ma'am.
How are you currently employed?
I'm a paramedic with Metro Atlanta Ambulance.
How long have you been a paramedic with Metro Atlanta?
I have been with them since last July.
July of 2017?
Uh-huh.
Prior to July of 2017, how were you employed?
AMR.
What's
American Medical Response.
And what did you do for AMR?
I was paramedic.
And how long were you with AMR?
4 years.
And prior to working with AMR, were you a paramedic somewhere else?
I was.
And where was that?
Rural Metro Ambulance.
And how long were you with them?
I was with them for 4 years as well.
Were you a paramedic at any other location?
Yes, I'm a fire medic in Banks County as well.
So total, how long have you been a paramedic?
I've been a paramedic since 2012 and have been in fire and EMS for 15 years.
I'm going to ask you about when you were with AMR in April of 2017. What were your duties and responsibilities there?
My duties as a paramedic is to control the scene, to render and provide all medical care to the patient and to bystanders if need be.
And how many people are typically on an ambulance?
Typically there are 2.
And you, so the paramedic, who's you, and then who else is on that ambulance?
Usually an EMT.
And who's actually driving the ambulance?
The EMT.
And between you and the EMT, who's the more advanced provider?
Myself.
What kind of training did you have to become an EMT and a paramedic?
To become an EMT, it took about a year and about 500 hours of clinicals. And to become a paramedic, I spent a total of 3 years in paramedic school with around 5,000 hours of clinicals.
You said 5,000 hours?
Yes, ma'am.
So other than the amount of training you've had and amount of hours of clinical, what's the difference between an EMT and a paramedic?
There's a different level of training. There's a different level of what you are and are not allowed to do. There are certain medications you cannot give as an EMT. There are certain skills you cannot practice as an EMT that you can as paramedic.
Now, as part of your training to be a paramedic, are you taught to make an initial assessment of a patient's condition?
Yes.
And are you also taught to render the care that you believe is appropriate at the time?
Yes.
And as part of that initial assessment, do you assess a patient from head to toe?
Yes.
As part of your training as a paramedic, are you trained to look for any signs of rigor?
Yes.
And what is rigor?
Rigor is when the body and the muscles stiffen after death has occurred.
And as part of your training, are you also trained to look for signs of drowning or near drowning?
Yes.
And what kind of signs do you look for?
Water in the trachea. You look for, when you're dealing with a drowning victim, anything that you might need to suction out of the lungs. What area are they in? You look at where they were found, not just the victim itself.
When you say water in the trachea, talk about the trachea. Can you tell us exactly where that is in the body?
So that is the airway. That is the air pipe that sits in front of the esophagus.
As part of your training, are you also taught to look for signs of burns?
Yes.
And in terms of burns, we hear a lot about the degrees. What's the difference between first, second, and third?
So first degree is slightly reddened skin, and it also is just the top layer of the skin. Second degree goes into the second layer of the skin, usually has blisters. It's where the nerve endings are. It is the most painful type of burn. And then a third or fourth degree burn goes all the way through to the bone.
Now, as part of your training as a paramedic, are you also trained to look for signs of old and new injuries?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Now, on April 28 of 2017, were you working at AMR? Were you on shift?
Yes.
And what was your typical shift hours, or did they vary?
They vary greatly. It depends if it was an overtime shift or a regular shift, and I honestly couldn't recall at this point.
Did you, in terms of the other individual on the ambulance, your EMT, did that person typically remain the same?
Yes, yeah. When we were on a full-time schedule, she was my full-time regular partner.
And who was she?
Michelle Seagraves.
And on April 28th of 2017, were you dispatched to 316 Glen Hollow Drive?
Yes,
And was Michelle Seagraves the driver on that date?
she was.
And were you the paramedic?
Yes, I was.
And how come you were dispatched to 316 Glen Hollow?
We got dispatched to a drowning, is how the call came out.
And other than getting information that it was a drowning, did you have any other information when you were dispatched?
10-year-old male drowning was all we had.
And is 316 Glen Hollow Drive in DeKalb County?
It is.
Now, at what time were you dispatched?
I wouldn't know without looking at my report.
As part of your duties as the paramedic, are you required to complete a pre-hospital care report?
Yes, yes,
And did you do that in this case?
I did.
And would looking at your report help you remember the time that you were dispatched?
Yes, absolutely.
And for the record, I'm going to mark it as State's Exhibit 84. You could review your report and see if that helps you refresh your memory as to what time you were dispatched.
Yes, so we were dispatched at 8:20 in the evening.
And what time did you arrive at 316 Glen Hollow?
We arrived at 8:27.
Now, when you first arrived, what did you observe?
When we arrived, the firefighters were carrying out a limp 10-year-old out of the house, the apartment.
And what was that limp 10-year-old wearing?
He was naked.
And what did you do upon seeing the firefighters carrying out the 10-year-old?
I put him on the stretcher. One of the firefighters told me they had gotten a pulse back. I checked for a pulse, found there to not be a pulse, and we started CPR on the way to the ambulance.
And at some point, did you learn what the patient's name was?
Yes,
And what was his name?
Kenzie Williams.
What did you do to try to get a pulse?
We followed ACS protocols as documented in my report.
And what is ACS?
ACLS is advanced cardiac life support. It's the basis of the appropriate standard of care for paramedics in a cardiac arrest situation.
And so you follow those protocols. What are those protocols?
Compressions, doing chest compressions, administering medications based on the patient's conditions and their heart rhythm, intubating the patient so that we can provide an airway for them and be able to provide adequate oxygenation. Provide adequate oxygen to the patient during the CPR efforts to try and get a pulse to return.
And at any time did you get a pulse?
No.
When you were doing this, were you en route to the hospital?
Yes.
Was there anyone else in the back of the ambulance with you?
Yes, I had 2 fire personnel ride in the back of the ambulance with me as well.
And other than Michelle driving the vehicle, was there anyone else in the vehicle?
Yes, Mr. Williams, the patient's father, was in the front seat of the vehicle next to Michelle.
Now, what is a Glasgow Coma Scale?
Glasgow Coma Scale is a way that we use to determine how the patient is mentating and what their cognitive abilities would be at that moment.
And is there a scale or a numerical scale that you use?
There is, yeah. There's 3 different parts to the scale based on eye movement, body movement, and mentation.
And what does it mean if you have a 3 on the Glasgow Coma Scale?
A 3 is dead or unresponsive.
And did you use the Glasgow Coma Scale assessment with Kente?
Yes,
And what did you give him? What number did you give him?
3.
At any point did you try to, you indicated you had tried to incubate or
Yes, I did intubate
We're all
him.
losing our voices,
Yes.
our language.
Yes.
And was there anything significant to you about trying to do that?
I had to suction his airway first because he had water in the airway, and then once I got him intubated, I also had to suction the trachea because there was water in the lungs as well.
So you said there was water in the airway as well as water in the
The lungs.
lungs. And with the airway, why did you make a note of the fact that there was water in the trachea and airway?
In most cases of an accidental drowning, laryngeal spasm will occur and no water will get into the airway. So the fact that there was water in the airway seemed pretty significant to me.
You used a term about spasms. What was that term? If you could spell it too, that would be helpful.
Yes, laryngeal spasm is Laryngeal. And
What is
that
that?
is when water hits the voice box and the muscles in the throat. They will actually spasm and tighten down so that no water can get into the airway itself.
And you said you see that in accidental drownings?
Yes.
And if there is no tightening, what does that mean?
It depends. Normally, it means if there is water in the trachea that somebody has tried to breathe while underwater.
So someone tries to breathe while underwater, that would mean they were responsive or doing normal life functions at that point?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Duke, I'm going to show you what I've marked as States Exhibits 2 through 29 and see if you recognize them.
Yes.
And how do you recognize them?
These were the pictures that were taken at the hospital after time of death was called.
And are these fair and accurate photographs of how Kente appeared at the hospital on April 28, 2017 after time of death is called?
Yes, they are.
And is it also, other than the tubes that you see, fair and accurate pictures of how he appeared when you began treating him on that same day?
Yes. Yes, it is.
It's time to tender States Exhibits 21 through 29 and ask for permission to publish.
No objection. Didn't know that.
I put on the screen what I've marked as States Exhibit 21. while doing the head-to-toe assessment, did you notice anything, is there anything significant to you on Kente's head that you noted?
I did. I noted some bruising. I also noted that the head itself had an odd shape, which could have been normal or could have been indicative of something else. But to the face, that was the main things I noticed, was the bruising and the shape of the head itself.
And there's a little bit of a glare, so you can also touch your screen. Could you kind of circle where you saw that bruising?
So there was bruising in this area, and then I believe that were the only areas that we saw bruising on the head itself.
And we're looking at State's Exhibit 22. What are you seeing in this photograph?
That's all in here is bruising.
Are you at all able to see the unusual shape that you described?
No, that's further back on his head.
Further back to, further back towards the back of the head?
Yes.
Now, other than the bruises that you saw to Kente's head, was there anything else significant to you about his skin?
Yes, he had several other bruises in multiple locations in various stages of healing, and he also had skin sloughing or peeling off his feet.
So you mentioned you saw some bruises in various stages of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And you also, on what part of his body did you see those?
Mostly on the torso and the arms.
And on Published States Exhibit 23. You mentioned his arms. Were these some injuries to his arms? What, if anything, was significant to you about what you see in States 23?
So at this point, the body is already, the blood is pooling to the bottom. It's harder to see the bruising that was able to see initially when we got there, because it's called lividity, and the blood actually pools to the lowest level where the patient has been laying. So he had been on that board
Judge,
for
at this
some
point, we're
time.
going to object. Ms. Tony or Dugan is not pretending as an expert. She's talking about lividity. That's actually, Dr. Gall's going to come and talk about all of that. She was an EMS person. She arrived. She can easily tell us what she saw, what she did, what she documented. But now as she goes into blood and pooling, that's for experts to make a determination. That's why we have a forensic doctor come.
All right. I believe Ms. Dugan did testify earlier that this was part of her training, that she has the training in the area to go into her experience, but she did say she had experience as well. Have you ever had any, when you were talking about lividity, have you had any experience in your 12 years about looking at patients who in various stages of lividity?
Yes, that helps us determine whether or not the patient is determined to be dead with no chance of resuscitation, or whether or not there is a chance of resuscitation. There are several signs, including lividity, that we look at to make those determinations on scene before providing patient care.
And how many times have you had to make that determination in your 12 years of experience?
More than I can count.
Over 100?
Probably.
I believe you also indicated that you're trained to look for signs of rigor.
Yes.
Okay. And how many times have you had to look for signs of rigor?
The same amount of time as the lividity. Anytime that we look for lividity, we check for rigor.
And in terms of, and you also talked about, have you ever had patients who have been drowned or who are nearly drowned?
Yes.
Okay. So you've personally treated patients who have drowned or nearly drowned?
Yes.
And how many of those?
3, including this one.
In the last year or total?
2 in the last year.
Okay, so you've had 2 in the last year? and total 3, including Kente? Okay. And how many of those were children?
All of them.
All of them are children. And in terms of treating patients with bruising or burns to their various parts of their body, how often have you treated patients in that condition?
At least 50, and as a mandated reporter, that's what we look at for child abuse.
So of those 50, have all the 50 children?
Yes.
At this time, I tender Ms. Dugan as an expert in the field of emergency medical care and as a paramedic.
I understand that. I have no problem with her being an expert in paramedics. This isn't about paramedics. She said that at this point in time the child is deceased. She's giving us her opinion based on his deceased. This is post-mortem. This is forensics. This is not paramedics. She already said the child was obviously dead. This is not forensics.
Let me hear the next question.
As to, well, tell me what, as part of your training, do you look for something called modeling?
Modeling, yes.
And why are you trained to look for that?
Modeling is also something that occurs after a cardiac arrest. After drowning, it's a discoloration to the skin.
And why are you taught to look for that?
It's signs and symptoms that we look for to, again, determine whether or not the patient is able to be resuscitated and how long they might have been down.
And is how long a patient, the length of time a patient being down, does that indicate whether the chances are for you to resuscitate?
It does. The longer a patient is down and their brain is not receiving oxygen, the less likely the chance that we will be able to get the heart to start again.
And does the amount of time that a person or patient is down, does that also indicate the type of treatment you may or may not provide them?
In the case of a cardiac arrest, not really, unless especially with a pediatric patient, unless there are major obvious signs of no chance of resuscitation, we give them every fighting chance we can.
So essentially with children, you try everything that you can? And is that what you did in this case?
Absolutely.
When you were rendering care to Kente, you also indicated you saw some injuries to his feet. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what I marked as State's Exhibit 26. You can describe what we're seeing in State's 26.
So this is the area where I mentioned that the skin was sloughing or peeling off the feet. That is usually indicative of a burn.
And as to, what are we looking at? State's 27.
Same thing. You've got the peeling or the sloughing of the skin, which again indicated to me that there was some type of burn, most likely by liquid.
And in State's 27, is that, what leg is that?
This is the left leg.
And State's 26, what leg is that?
That is the right leg.
You indicated you saw some bruising to the torso.
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked State's Exhibit 28. In this photograph, you see the bruising to the torso that you saw on that date.
Yes.
And if you could circle the area where...
Yeah, it's a little difficult to see, but right here there was some bruising that was in a loop-like pattern right inside that circle.
And where, you can kind of help us orient this photograph, what part of the body?
He is laying on his back, and that is on his left side.
So,
Right like that.
So if I was going to put the photograph this way, this is 28. Would the patient's head be at the top or the bottom of the screen?
It would be at the top,
And the patient's legs would be?
at the bottom.
Other than the burns to Kente's feet, was there anything else significant about them? About their condition?
When we went to put him in the stretcher, his feet were already stiff. When we were trying to put him in the ambulance, we were trying to manipulate his feet and they were already stiff.
What did that tell you?
That Rigor could have been setting in.
At any point, did you receive information from Kente's father, Leon Williams, about Kente's condition?
I asked him if he had any medical problems or took any medications or was allergic to anything, to which he answered no. And other than that, I didn't have a whole lot of time to ask him questions. Those are the main questions that we're concerned with in a cardiac arrest situation.
So the things you were concerned about, I'm sorry, were medicines?
Any medical history, if the patient is taking any medications and what they are, because of the medical interactions, the medication interactions that can happen between the cardiac drugs that we get, and then if he was allergic to any medications.
And he answered no to all those questions?
Yes.
Did he tell you anything about Kente's, other than medication, anything else about his medical history?
I later learned about the autism and developmental delay.
Okay. And did you learn that from Kente's father or from somewhere else?
From him, yeah.
From Kente's father. And when you say later, what do you mean later?
After we had already gotten to the hospital, we stayed at the hospital until after they called time of death and tried to comfort Mr. Williams.
Okay. And so it was at the hospital that he gave you the information about the autism and developmental delay?
Yes.
Did he ever tell you that the child, Kente, had a seizure problem?
No.
And the person that rode in the ambulance with you and you spoke to at the hospital and you referred to as Leon Williams, do you see him here in the courtroom today?
I did.
Okay. Could you identify him, please, by what he's wearing and where he's seated?
Yes, ma'am. He's right over here in the olive blazer.
The record reflect the witnesses identified the defendant. Now, did you ever speak with Leon Williams about what happened to Kente?
I got the story mostly from the firefighters because they were on scene when we got there, and I never actually walked into the house because of that because they were carrying him out. But the story that I got was...
No, don't. It's okay. You can't say what the story you got.
Okay.
Unless you got it from Mr. Williams.
Yeah, what he relayed to me was that...
Hold on this side. When you say he... Did
Mr. Williams.
Okay, so you spoke to this is something Mr. Williams told you.
In the front of the ambulance.
Okay. What did he say?
That he left Kente in the bathroom and went to go change, and that when he came back, Kente was unresponsive.
Now, while riding to the hospital, did you hear Leon Williams say anything at that time?
Yes.
What did he say?
At one point he asked me how he was doing and if he was okay, and I told him that we were still doing CPR, we did not have a pulse, and that I could give him an update once we got to the hospital. And I overheard him say several times in the front seat of the ambulance, DFAX isn't going to give me another kid now.
Who was he speaking to?
I don't know if he was speaking to himself or my partner, Michelle. My attention was focused on the patient.
Okay. And how many times did you hear him say that?
At least 4. in the ambulance. He mentioned it a couple more times at the hospital as well.
So 4 times in the ambulance and twice at least at the hospital. How long were you at the hospital with the patient?
Mercy. I was in the hospital for about an hour and 10 minutes.
So let me ask you this. Between the time that you left Glen Hollow and arrived at the hospital, what was that time period? Does your report tell you when you arrived?
Yes.
Okay, and what time did you arrive?
It does. I arrived at 8:50.
And does your report also tell you what time you left?
Yes. We left the scene at 8:31.
Okay. So 19 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So it takes you 19 minutes to get to the hospital. And then you spend an hour and 10 minutes approximately at the hospital. What were you doing at the hospital at that point?
We stayed in the room until after they called time of death, and then the doctor and I both spoke and thought that Mr. Williams should probably stay at the hospital until the detectives got there, because he kept trying to leave the hospital after they called time of death.
When they called time of death, who was in the room?
The only people in the room were the hospital staff, myself, my partner Michelle. Mr. Williams was outside of the room at that time, and the doctor went out and spoke with him when time of death was called.
Okay. So time of death is called in the room. The doctor leaves and goes to speak to Mr. Williams. Are you present for that conversation?
No, I was still in the room with Kente.
Okay. And at that point, did Mr. Leon Williams come into the room after time of death is called? Does he come back into the room?
I never saw him come into the room.
Okay.
He was in the hallway, and he was in the room across from the room Kente was in.
Did you see Leon Williams any time after that?
I walked into the room to see how he was doing, because they had taken him into the room across from Kente to calm him down. And he, at that point, jumped up and kept repeating the phrase, "I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta get out of here." And then he left the hospital.
And was that the last time you saw him?
Yes.
And how far into that hour and 10 minutes that you were at the hospital did Mr. Leon Williams leave the hospital?
Maybe 15 minutes after time of death was called.
So after that 15 minutes, you're at the hospital for another, 50 minutes? What are you doing during those 50 minutes?
I was finishing my report. I was getting signatures from the doctor on the tube. We get signatures saying that it was good and in place when he arrived. I sat beside Kente while I finished my report because I was sentimental. I didn't feel like he should sit there by himself, even though he was already gone. And then we were asked to wait for the detective to take our initial statements.
How long were you by Kente's side during that time period?
A good half hour.
And during that half hour, you didn't see Leon Williams come into the room?
No.
No further questions, thank you.
So, ma'am, when you got there to Glen Hollow, fire brings Kente out,
Yes.
and you'd already been somewhat apprised that it was near drowning, possible drowning, cardiac arrest situation.
Yes.
Because you received that through dispatch, correct?
Yes.
And once Kente came and got into the transport, you knew it wasn't a good situation, didn't you? for
Yes.
Kente?
Yes, I did.
It was almost kind of obvious.
Yes.
Because you did a check. You heard from fire that they may have gotten a pulse,
Yes.
but you didn't get a pulse.
No. No, when they said they had one, I immediately checked to see if CPR efforts needed to be continued.
And then you made your own examination, no pulse, no breathing, child did not appear to be any way conscious. And based on, I guess, analytical scales, and just based on your own experience, you recognize that Kente was already probably gone at that point.
Yes, that he was in cardiac arrest.
And probably at a point where it was not likely he was going to be revived.
Possibly.
But obviously, as you stated, because he's a child. Oftentimes, we go above and beyond, try to bring back a child.
Absolutely.
And that's what happened in this case. So I believe you stated in your report that you did administer some medications.
Yes.
And tell the jury what you administered.
Epinephrine.
Okay. And epinephrine's purpose is to...
It is to get the heart going again. It's to kickstart the heart, basically.
And how many times do you give Kente epinephrine?
I would have to refer to my report.
Okay.
Yeah. Looks like... Five times.
5 times. Which, one time is sometimes good enough, isn't it?
I've never given it one time and gotten a pulse back in my experience, but I know that it can be depending on how long the patient has been in.
2 times may be good enough.
ACLS protocols say you repeat the dose every 3 to 5 minutes until time of death is called.
Okay. And that's what you did in this case.
Yes.
Regardless of the fact that from the point in time which you had contact with Kente, up until the point in time which he was received at Eggleston,
Yes.
there were no signs of life.
No.
And as you told us, looking at some other factors, considerations, looking at his body, it appeared though the child had been deceased, at least for a little while. So you mentioned to us that you're there at the hospital, and by this time Mr. Williams is taken to a different room,
Yes.
so that basic physicians can treat the child as best or as possible.
Right. Yes.
And I believe you told the police in your statement that Mr. Williams, I believe you said he was in a panic,
Yes.
and he was visibly upset.
Yes, absolutely.
And he was talking about defects, I don't think I'm unfit, and he was also like crying out to God, don't take Kente.
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear him crying out saying, don't take him.
He told the police that, oh God, you got to make it, Kente. Recall that?
No, not right offhand. I don't. I'm sorry.
But you did make an audio statement to the police, correct?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That night? And you did a written statement.
Yes.
Recall your written statement.
Okay.
And I'm just going to show you what's more expensive than one, just for the purpose of possibly refreshing your recollection. And I'm going to ask you, draw your attention to the middle of the page. You saw the police, you gave an audio statement, and then they did a synopsis, and you recall signing off on the synopsis that the police did.
Yes.
Draw your attention to the middle of the page, about where the X is. What did you tell the police that one of the things that Mr. Williams said?
Dad stated, oh God, you got to make it. They're going to think I'm unfit.
And he said that multiple times too. Because that's generally what he was saying about Kennedy got to survive. They're going to think I'm unfit. That's what he was saying over and over again.
I wrote it in here that he said it the one time. I do not personally recall him saying it or saying it multiple times.
And actually, in your statement there, you didn't mention that he said it multiple times in either form or fashion, did you?
No, it doesn't say anything about saying it multiple times.
Okay. Now, that night, Mr. Williams rode to the hospital with you. And you were telling us that at some point in time, Kennedy was pronounced. Mr. Williams was with hospital personnel. Mm-hmm. And you said that by the time you left the hospital, you didn't know where Mr. Williams was, correct?
I didn't know where he was well before I left the hospital.
When you left the hospital, you didn't know where he was.
No.
So you don't know if he'd gone outside to smoke a cigarette or hopped on a plane in California, do you?
I went outside looking for him, yes, with the DeKalb police officer at Eggleston Hospital when we were trying to find him for the detectives.
And are you aware that he was outside the hospital?
I'm not aware of that. We did not see him, neither me or the officer.
Or are you aware that he made a statement to the police at the hospital?
And I was told he came back to the hospital by the detective, yes.
Thank you.
The exhibit that was shown to you by defense counsel last night, is that in your handwriting?
This, no.
And you in fact gave a recorded statement, and that was in your own words.
Yes.
And in your own recorded statement, did you tell the detectives everything you remembered on that date to the best of your ability?
Yes.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And in your audio recorded statement, did you tell the detectives that the defendant mentioned something about defects a couple of times?
Yes. Yes, I did.
And that they're going to think I'm unfit, referring to defects?
I remember him saying that they're not going to give him another kid. I don't remember. And obviously, from my statement here, I did hear that, but I don't recall it at this time.
You don't recall that?
Yeah, the unfit part. I did hear him say multiple times, though, about defects not going to give him another kid. So.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms.
Next judge, we call CSI Brown.
Raise your right hand. You swear affirm testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
State your name.
Tiansha Brown.
Good afternoon. Could you please tell the jury what are your duties?
My duties at the time of
Let me ask you this, I apologize. How are you currently employed?
Henry County Sentence Enforcement,
And back in April of 2017, how were you employed?
DeKalb County Police Department.
And what did you do for the DeKalb County Police Department?
I was a senior crime scene investigator.
And can you tell the jury some of your duties as a senior crime investigator?
My duties are to respond to crime scenes once a call comes out over the radio. Once I get to the scene, I take digital photographs, collect a digital video recording, a sketch if necessary, collect any DNA evidence, or a process for fingerprints.
And those were your same duties back on April 28th of 2017, correct?
Yes.
And did you have the occasion to respond to 316 Glen Hollow Drive inside DeKalb County?
Yes.
And I want to show you, and as part of your duties, do you also generate a report?
Yes.
I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 19 and 20, and then State's Exhibits 30 through 83. So if you don't mind flipping through those.
I've already shown this to the defense. and you'd like to see more.
And if I may approach.
And do you recognize 19, 20, and then 32 through
83 is photographs that you took of that crime scene back on April 28th, 2017.
Yes.
And as to State's Exhibits 30 and 31, are you the one that created those diagrams in 30 and 31?
Yes.
And do they appear to all be a fair and accurate depiction of the photographs that you did and the work that you created?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time we'd ask to tender into evidence 19, 20, and then 30 through 83.
No objection.
What I would like to do, if it is okay with you, is to start with the diagram that you created. Explain for the jury, what are we looking at here?
What number?
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge, this is State's Exhibit 30. What is that we're looking at?
That is the first floor of the residence, a rough sketch that I took on scene, but completed the final sketch in the office.
Okay. And the one that you did on scene, were you able to, what were you able to capture within that image?
Just the general outlook of the first floor.
And do you take measurements to come up with this diagram?
Yes.
And if you are walking into the house, just explain really briefly, when you walk in, what is the first room you encounter?
The living room,
And then next, if you keep walking to your left,
that's the kitchen.
and then to your right,
The downstairs half bath,
and then the final room.
and that is the den.
Okay.
Or
And was
dining
it,
room, I'm sorry.
say it again.
The dining room.
Okay. What I would like to do is to quickly go through some of the images. State's Exhibit 32. What was that?
That's the front doorway entrance of the home.
33,
The exterior of the home.
34,
The living room is of the downstairs.
are we looking from the entrance into it?
The front entrance doorway, yes.
35, what is this? Is this the entrance door?
Yes.
36,
That was the table in the living room.
and 37, is that a close-up of items on that table?
Yes.
38,
It's another close-up.
okay. And the name that's on that pillbox? What's the name on there?
Kentera.
Okay. Did you obtain the search warrant to take these photographs?
Could you
Did you
clarify?
obtain a search warrant? Can you obtain a search warrant?
No.
Okay. Was a search warrant obtained prior to you taking these photographs?
Yes.
And is it customary to leave a copy of that search warrant on scene?
Yes.
And did you photograph that search warrant?
I did.
Okay. And is that in State's Exhibit 39?
Yes.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 4, and just to go back, was that left on that same table in State's 36?
Yes.
40,
That's the downstairs hallway.
41,
The kitchen.
42,
The stove inside in the kitchen.
43,
The sink in the kitchen.
44,
The downstairs bathroom.
45,
The dining room.
46,
Another photograph of the dining room.
47,
That's leading towards the upstairs by the front entrance doorway.
so we're back to the front of the house, correct?
Yes.
And then on your chart, you mentioned what was found on the arm of that couch.
Yes, the progress report and a note from the victim's teacher.
Okay. And in addition, on that arm of the sofa, do you recall what was right there?
A plastic bag with pills inside.
Okay. And did you take further pictures of that?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 48. Is that those pills?
Yes.
And 49?
Yes. Close up of the pills.
50, is that still the pills?
Yes.
51, is that the pills as well?
Yes.
And 52, that's also the pills?
Yes.
And those are different shots of those same bottles?
Yes.
Okay. 53, what is that?
The digital photograph leading upstairs.
Okay. And I want to show you now Stacy's Exhibit 31. Did you do a diagram as well for the second floor of that house?
Yes.
Okay. And so those stairs that we just saw in Stacy's Exhibit 53, do you see those on your chart?
Yes.
And if you could just briefly reach over and circle those same stairs that we see in that photograph. Okay. Then 54, what do we see there?
The digital photograph leading into a guest bedroom and back downstairs.
Okay. 55,
The hallway of upstairs.
56,
The master bedroom upstairs.
57,
Another photograph of the master bedroom.
58,
Another photograph of the master bedroom.
59,
A photograph of the nightstand in the master bedroom.
60,
Another photograph in the master bedroom.
and in your diagram, you indicated that from 2 locations within the bedroom that you collected miscellaneous papers, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And are those 2 locations we just saw in the photographs, those piles of paper?
Yes.
Did some of those papers include what was previously introduced as State's Exhibits from the approach 2 and 3? Were those collected as part of those piles, as part of your evidence collection? And then State's Exhibit 61, are we still in the master bath? The master bedroom?
Yes.
Okay. 62,
The master bathroom.
63,
Another photograph of the master bathroom.
64, is this the second bedroom?
Yes.
Okay. 65,
The belts that were laying on the table in the guest bedroom.
66,
A close-up of the belts.
67,
A close-up of the pants that were found in the guest.
I apologize.
A close-up of the pants and the shirt that were found in the guest bedroom.
I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 85. Do you recognize the items in State's Exhibit 85?
Yes.
And who collected those from the scene?
I did.
And do these items coincide with the photograph that you took in State's Exhibit 66
Yes.
and 65?
Yes.
Judge, if I may tender into evidence State's Exhibit 85, which will encompass all of the belts that were collected.
Okay. Good, object.
And do you recall collecting this belt from the scene?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, that would be the khaki stripe belt. Do you recall the light blue stripe belt being collected from the scene?
Yes.
The navy blue striped belt Do you recall that from being collected from the scene?
Yes.
The solid khaki belt, do you recall that being collected from the scene?
Yes.
The black fabric belt, do you remember that being collected from the scene?
Yes.
The brown leather belt, do you remember that being collected from the scene?
Yes.
And the reversible black and brown belt, do you remember that being collected from the scene?
Yes.
And are all these belts that we just went through the same ones that are captured in State's Exhibit 66?
Yes.
In State's Exhibit 67, there was clothing. Was that collected?
Yes.
Okay. Combination of State's Exhibit 86. This appear to be the same items that were collected.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd ask to enter into evidence State's Exhibit 86.
No objection.
In State's Exhibit 86, the same items that were in State's photographed in State's Exhibit 67.
Yes.
And to backtrack just a little bit, the pillbox that was photographed, was that collected as well?
Yes.
Okay. I want to show you what's been marked State's Exhibit 87. Does that appear to be the same item that you collected from this crime scene?
Yes.
Now, at this time, we'd ask to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit 87.
No objection.
Okay, so the same room that State's Exhibit 67 was in, State's Exhibit 68, is that also in that same room still?
Yes.
And if you can tell, which door is it that we see right here in that photograph?
The main door to the bedroom.
Okay. So if you were to walk out that doorway, where would you be?
In the upstairs hallway.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit 69,
It's another digital photograph of the guest bedroom.
70,
A digital photograph of the wall in the guest bedroom.
and was there anything that was there a reason you took this photograph in particular?
There was a defect in the wall.
When you say the defect, if you could just circle where that is in the photograph. State's Exhibit 71.
That's a digital photograph of the rug from the bathroom.
So would this be the threshold between the bedroom and the bathroom?
Yes.
72.
A digital photograph of the guest bathroom.
73.
A digital photograph of the sink in the guest bathroom.
74.
A digital photograph of the toilet in the guest bathroom.
75.
A digital photograph of the tub in the guest bathroom.
Now, that tub, when you arrived, was there any water in it?
No.
Okay. Would you ever, well, like that, what if anything would you do if you arrived on scene and there was still water in the tub?
We would just document it by taking photographs with the water in the tub prior to letting the water out.
And that was not, there was, at least to the best of your knowledge, there was never water in that tub.
No.
State's Exhibit 76.
Close-up of the knobs in the tub.
And this is how it appeared when you arrived, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell which knob is missing, or would it, actually, let me show you State's Exhibit 77, see if that helps. Which of the two knobs is missing?
The knob to the cold water.
And State's Exhibit 78, is that a close-up of what we see in the corner of 76?
Yes.
And what is that?
The knob to the cold water.
State's Exhibit 79.
Another digital photograph of the tub.
And then 80,
That's
are we
the,
still in the bathroom?
yes.
Okay. And 81,
Another digital photograph of the clothes that were on the floor in the bathroom.
82,
A digital photograph of the clothes hanging up in the bathroom.
and 83.
Another digital photograph of the clothes.
And we also had, that was previously referred to in prior testimony regarding 20
A digital photograph of the bathroom.
and 19.
A digital photograph of the tub in the bathroom.
Other than collecting the evidence and documenting, taking the photographs and collecting, creating the diagrams, was that all of your involvement in this case?
I also did a digital video recording as well.
Okay. And was that all of your involvement?
Yes.
Okay. And as part of your report, you documented everything that was collected?
Yes.
Okay. Nothing further.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
You told us about how you arrived on scene, and what time did you arrive on scene, you recall?
I wanted to look at my report to recall the exact time.
Go ahead and approach. So what time did you arrive on scene?
23, 29 hours.
23:29. What's that in layman's terms?
11:29.
11:29. So 11:29 when you arrived on the scene, correct?
Yes.
So by the time you arrived on the scene, police were already there, correct?
Yes.
Probably EMS, they probably already left the scene by that time, correct?
That's correct.
By that time, the patient, Mr. Williams, the young Mr. Williams, he was no longer on scene either, correct?
No.
And of course, Mr. Leon Williams, the defendant, he wasn't on the scene either, correct?
No.
Was there an older lady an older civilian lady, was she present on the scene?
Yes.
Okay, so there was one civilian on scene.
Yes.
And when I say civilian, I mean non-police personnel.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you understand where I'm coming from?
Yes.
And all the rest were the officers and detectives with the Cali County Police Department on scene.
Yes.
Now, when you arrive on scene as a CSI person, you told us how you documented with a diagram, you documented with photos, and you documented with a video.
Yes.
And then also, you were tasked with collecting certain items.
Yes.
Now, the items that were collected, were you directed to collect those items, or did you choose to collect those items on your own?
It varies by scene, but this scene in particular, I was told to collect those items.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and who told you?
The lead detective that was on the scene at the time.
Now, on TV, CSI means the person who does everything and takes charge. Is that the way it works in real life?
No.
No. There's a lead detective, and the scene detective, he's the one that actually directs you to focus on certain things at various times.
Yes.
Because your task, you're going to take pictures regardless, right?
Yes.
But sometimes a detective may say, hey, make sure you get this, make sure you get that, right?
Yes.
And in this case, you're going to, if something you think is relevant, you may pick it up. But especially if the detective tells you, get these papers, get those medicines, that's what you pick up, correct?
Yes.
Now, you collect some belts, correct?
Yes.
And those belts, did you test them in any sort of way?
No.
Okay. Like when I say test them, like did you fingerprint them?
No.
Or examine them for any blood or DNA, anything like that, like we see on TV?
No.
Okay. But you did collect them.
Yes.
And once you collect them, what do you do with them?
I took it back to the crime scene lab and packaged it to go to the property room.
Okay. Now, do you take it to the property room?
Yes.
And did you do that in this case?
I did.
So you took those items back to the property room back on April 28th, 29th, 30th or so of last year.
Yes.
And to your knowledge, they've been there since that time.
Yes.
Okay. Now, also, we have some medications, which you took photos of, and you collected the pill box. Did you do an examination to determine what those medications were for?
No.
Okay. You just documented the medications.
Yes.
And there were some.
Yes.
And there was a pill box.
Yes.
Okay. And the clothes.
Yes.
The clothes, let's say these items, it's a regular house, right? Regular apartment.
Yes.
So obviously there's lots of clothes in the apartment. The apartment you lived in, correct?
Yes.
But particularly the clothes in which you have shown us are a pair of pants and a shirt, which are found in the laundry basket.
Yes.
And so the simple presumption would be is more than likely these are clothes that were recently worn, correct?
Yes.
And the clothes, when you picked them up, they were in the laundry basket and they were dirty.
Yes.
And they look a little bit worn.
Yes.
And then because they've been in property all this time, they're now a bit wrinkled up.
Yes.
Okay. Now the clothes themselves, did you do any examination on them? Because we saw the clothes look like they got some stains on them.
Yes.
And those stains, do you know, are those grass stains?
I'm not sure.
Or possibly blood stains?
I'm not sure.
Or possibly tomato stains or anything like that? You don't know, don't you?
No.
Do you? And because you didn't test them.
No.
And to your knowledge, they weren't forwarded on to any other agency to test, correct?
No.
Okay. Now, after you document the scene, after you collect evidence, do you have any further involvement in this case?
No.
Okay. Were you involved with speaking to any of the witnesses or possibly the defendant themselves?
No.
Okay. Thank you. You ready to read?
No.
You excuse me. Thank you. Next statement.
Thank you, Judge. Next, the state call Detective Evans to the stand.
You swear affirm testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
State your name.
Detective K. Evans,
Detective Evans, how are you currently employed?
DeKalb County Police Department,
And how long have you been with DKPD?
2008.
And are you currently assigned to a particular unit or division?
Yes, I am.
And which one is that?
I'm assigned to the Special Victims Domestic Violence Unit.
And if you could just briefly explain for the jury, what types of cases do you handle within your unit?
Special Victims, we handle cruelty against children, cruelty against elders, sexual assaults, missing persons, domestic violence.
And are you currently post-certified?
Yes, I am.
And can you just describe for the jury what does that mean?
Post-certification is the police officers' standards and training, which requires us to have the minimum requirements as far as educational and training for ethical and just professional law enforcement services.
And back in April of 2017, were you still in the SVU unit?
Yes, I was.
How long have you been in there?
Since 2013.
Okay. How were you involved in the case against Leon Williams?
As a part of the Special Victims Unit, the uniform officers received a call in reference to a person down call, which refers to basically non-responsive or a sick person. The officers responded to Egerson's Children's Hospital. Detective Benton responded to the hospital, and we were advised that in reference to a child being deceased, several units worked together as a team. We respond to the house or the location of the incident. Officers respond to the hospital, and we proceed to investigate the case.
And who is the lead in this case?
In this case, it was Detective Benton.
Okay. And you said that the team, he responded to Chella.
Yes.
And then where did you respond?
I responded to the incident location.
And do you recall where that was?
It was on 316 Glen Hollow, apartment 5, I believe.
And do you know the name of the apartment complex?
I think it's a Serenade apartment.
Okay. And is that located inside DeKalb County?
Yes, it is.
When you responded to this scene, who else was there?
Once I arrived at the scene, there were, of course, several officers there. We secured the location, so you have the uniform officers arrive. A couple of supervisors, DeKalb County Special Victim Supervisors were there, the medical examiner, and personnel from the DA's office.
Okay. And by the time that you arrived, you stated that you had already received information that the victim was deceased in this case, correct?
Yes.
And did you go right into the house, or what was the procedure that you utilized?
First, I was tasked with obtaining a search warrant for the location. That's standard procedure in reference to gathering evidence of a location. So my role was to first get the search warrant obtained through the judge, and then proceed to the incident location so that it will be executed.
And I want to show you what's been marked State's Exhibit 88. Tell me if you recognize this document.
Yes. It's a search warrant that I obtained for that incident and that location.
Okay. Your Honor, this is as tender into evidence, State's Exhibit 80. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it a fair and accurate copy of the search warrant you obtained on that date?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, we'd ask tendered into evidence.
Okay.
And once you obtained this search warrant, what did you do next?
Once we obtained the search warrant, that's when I responded to the location in order to execute it. When we arrived there, the location should and has been, officers have been there just to detain or just make sure that no evidence is removed from the location. We go in. When I arrived there, there was a lady there. She stated she was the grandmother of the victim, and she's this mother of Mr. Leon Williams.
Okay. And do you recall her name?
Yes, Jerry Williams.
And did you get a statement from Ms. Williams?
Yes, I did.
And was that recorded?
Yes, it was. It's an audio recorded statement.
Okay. You stated something about making sure that everyone's retained. Is the actual crime scene secured?
Yes, it is.
And what does it mean to secure a crime scene?
To secure it means that no one enters or leaves and no evidence removed from the location during the investigation.
Would the crime scene be altered in any way?
No, it would not.
And was a copy of that search warrant left at the location?
Yes, that's standard to leave a copy of it with a person or either somewhere in the home.
Did crime scene ever arrive on scene?
Yes, crime scene was contacted also and arrived.
Did they arrive before or after you got there, if you recall?
Possibly afterwards, because crime scene doesn't respond until we have a search warrant in order to come into the home and obtain evidence or whatever, photos or what have you. So they were called afterwards.
So were you present when crime scene Tech Brown arrived on scene and documented the scene?
Yes, I was.
And did you direct her at any point to collect any pieces of evidence?
Yes.
Okay. And I want you to look at what's already been tendered as State's 87, 86, and 85, and just let me know if you recall these items being on scene on 428. You don't have to take them. And that's State's Exhibit 85 that you have. You recognize that?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, State's Exhibit 86, you recognize that being collected from the scene?
Oh, yes, I do.
And State's 87, you recognize that being collected from the scene?
I do.
And there were other items that either you told CSI Brown to collect or that she decided to collect, correct?
Yes.
And were you told where the incident occurred inside the home? Which room of the home it occurred in?
Yes, I was.
And which room was it?
It was in the bathroom, the victim's bathroom,
Okay.
and
I
which
want,
is
go ahead.
in his bedroom.
I want to show you what's previously been marked as State's Exhibit 19. Does that appear to be the same room where you were told the incident took place?
It appears to be yes.
And State's Exhibit 79, same bathroom? Same bathtub, sorry.
Yes, it appears to be the same bathtub.
And 75, same?
Yes.
And 76.
Yes.
When you arrived on scene, was there any water in that tub?
No, there wasn't any water in the tub.
Given that there was no water in the tub, what, if any, tests were you able to perform to test any potential water temperature the victim could have been in?
I wasn't able to test any water temperature.
And why is that?
Because there wasn't any water in the tub.
Okay.
So I didn't test.
Could you test, did you have access to the water heater?
I don't recall having access to it.
Okay. At any point, did you test the water temperature?
I did not.
Okay. Did you ask that, let me strike that. The clothing that was collected that you previously identified as being collected from State's Exhibit 86, did anybody inform you as to who those clothes belong to?
Yes, Miss Williams, the grandmother, she pointed out the clothes that the victim had on
Okay.
earlier that day.
And on scene, was it just you or were there other members of law enforcement also there?
There were other members.
On scene that evening, were any witnesses identified?
Yes, several of the neighbors were out looking on, as well as giving comments about what they knew. Some of them were interviewed, and some of them were calling us. I know at least one called me to tell me what she heard or knew. And,
Do you recall the name of that witness that contacted you?
I'm sorry, I don't recall right now.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection to look at your report?
Yes, please. Oh, Miss Nash, yes, Miss Ash, yes, Miss Nash, Miss Ashley Nash.
Was it Alicia?
Alicia, excuse me.
Okay. Alicia Nash is who you spoke with?
Yes.
Okay. And you said she flagged you down?
Oh, yes, there were several neighbors out because the incident had drawn a lot of onlookers, and she happened to be one of the neighbors just across the yard. It's more like an L shape. The victim's apartment ran parallel with the street, and Miss Nash's apartment was the L shape. Coming from the parking lot, you have to pass her apartment to get to the incident location.
And you stated that you were not the lead detective in this, correct?
No, it's not.
Okay. And so did you submit your reports and witness statements and any information that you gathered to Detective Benton to make part of his case?
I did.
Okay. And when you arrived on scene, was the defendant on scene?
No.
Was the victim on scene?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
So you were essentially the scene detective.
One of the detectives on scene.
Okay. Because you told us how you helped direct CSI to pick up certain things and collect certain items.
Yes.
Like particularly you just identified some belts that you directed them to pick up and
Yes.
take into property. Now, Ms. Racine just asked you about the bathtub. And there didn't appear to be water in the bathtub, correct?
Correct.
Now, did you go to both bathtubs?
Yes, probably looked over the entire apartment.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you went to the bathtub, you didn't notice any water. However, it looks as though at some point in time while you were on scene, you were made aware that there were some burns to the child's feet, correct?
Yes, there was some type of injuries. Yes.
Consistent with a liquid burn.
I don't know. I was told there were some type of blisters at the skin that kind of come loose from the body.
Okay. So, sounds like then that maybe you weren't told that the blisters may have been caused by hot water in the bathtub.
I wasn't sure what they were called from. The victim wasn't at the location. My conversation with Mrs. Williams is that she asked what happened to the child's feet.
Okay. Because you were just telling Ms. Racine, it appears though you didn't turn on either, or attempt to turn on the hot or the cold water in the bathtub. Did you?
I did not.
Then, going to the next step, you didn't test to see what the temperature was then of the hot or the cold water coming out of the bathtub.
I did not.
Okay. Going a step further, then I'm going to further assume that you didn't test to see what the settings were for the water heater in the basement or the lower portion of the apartment.
I did not.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you read it?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Detective. You're excused. You may step down.
Thank you.
Everybody call us Mr. Wood.
Next, Your Honor, State call Detective Benson to the stand.
Judge Whip, bro.
You swear affirm testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
State your name.
Detective Benton.
And Detective Benton, could you please say and spell your first and last name?
Yes. First name is Casey, C-A-S-E-Y. Last name Benton, B-E-N-T-O-N.
And Detective Benton, how are you employed?
I work in the DeKalb County Police Department in the Special Victims Unit.
And how long have you been employed at the DeKalb County Police Department?
About 12 years with the police department.
And how long in SVU?
About 2 years.
Okay. And what type of training and experience have you received to handle SVU cases?
Throughout my career, I've got about approximately 350 hours of training in related to investigations or special victims related material. I've also handled several hundred cases that are special victims related.
And part of your training, do you learn interview techniques?
Yes.
Of suspects?
Yes.
Okay. And are you post-certified?
Yes, I am.
What role did you play in the case against Leon Williams?
I was the lead detective.
And when did you first become involved in the case?
I was notified of it on the 28th of April at about 8:30 p.m.
And how were you notified?
I was notified by uniformed officers who responded to a person down call.
And did they respond on scene or somewhere else?
They responded to the scene.
And did you ever go to the scene?
No, I did not.
Were you able to gather information as to where the actual scene occurred?
Yes.
And where was that?
It was 316 Glen Hollow Drive, apartment 5, I believe.
And is that in DeKalb County?
Yes, it is.
And you said you did not respond to the scene. Why did you not go to the scene?
I was informed that the victim was being transported to the hospital, so I responded to the hospital where the victim was being transported.
And is that standard procedure in these
Yes,
types of
it is.
cases? At any point were you advised of what happened on scene prior to your involvement? By EMT or by fire department, any of the other parties that responded initially?
Yes, I was notified of the basics of the call by uniform officers, and then through other interviews, I learned more of what happened at the scene.
And I apologize if you already answered, but you stated that the victim had already been transported from the scene. Where was the victim transported to?
Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at Eggleston,
And where is that campus located?
in Decatur.
And do you recall about what time you responded to Eggleston?
I believe I arrived at the hospital between 9 and 9:30.
When you arrived at the hospital, did you receive any indication as to whether or not the child was still alive?
I was informed that the child was not alive,
And when did you receive that information?
just shortly after arriving.
Do you know who pronounced the child dead?
Dr. Frazier Bowe, I believe.
And she a CHOA doctor?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to observe the victim's body?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to identify who the victim is in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And who is the victim?
Kente Williams.
Did you have an opportunity, I believe I asked you already, to observe the body? You said you did, correct?
Yes, I did.
I want to show you what was previously introduced. State's Exhibit 23, does this appear to be the same state that you observed the victim when you arrived at CHOA Eggleston on April 28th?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you personally observe about Kente's body based on your observations?
I observed that he had what appeared to be burns on his feet where the skin was peeling away from his body, and also observed bruises on his side that had somewhat of a loop shape to them.
And at that time, when you noticed the burns to the feet, did you know the cause of those injuries?
Not at that time. I didn't know specifically what had caused them.
Okay. And the loop-shaped bruising, at that time, when you first observed them, did you know what caused those injuries?
No, I didn't know exactly what had caused them.
Okay. Would you stay in contact with the other officers that were on scene?
Yes.
Okay, and would they stay in contact with you?
Yes, they would.
Did anybody else arrive at CHOA Eggleston while you were there?
Yes.
And to be specific, any other investigators arrived?
Yes. Investigator Fleming with the DA's office arrived at the hospital, and also Investigator Dennerline with the DeKalb County Medical Examiner's office arrived at the hospital.
And is that typical procedure when you have a child death?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Was a suspect identified prior to your involvement?
Yes.
And who is that individual?
Leon Williams.
And when you arrived on scene, were you able to locate that individual?
Yes, I was.
And where was he located?
He was in the front lobby of the Eggleston Hospital.
And prior to your arrival, did you receive any information about the defendant staying on scene?
Yes, I was informed.
Objection here, sir.
I'll just, without telling me what they said, were you informed about any other whereabouts of the defendant prior to your arrival?
Yes.
Okay.
Objection still here, sir.
I'll move on, Judge. Once you located the defendant, what, if anything, happened?
I located the defendant, detained him, myself and another officer at the hospital, detained the defendant. We took him out in front of the hospital and placed him in a marked police unit, and he was transported to headquarters, to police headquarters.
And did you conduct any interviews of the defendant at the hospital?
No, not at the hospital.
Are you aware if any law enforcement conducted any interviews of the defendant at the hospital?
I'm not aware of anyone.
Okay. Did you eventually interview the defendant?
Yes, I did.
And where did that take place?
At police headquarters.
Prior to that interview of the defendant, did you locate or identify any other witnesses?
Yes, I did.
And who was that?
Jennifer Toney, who was an EMT that transported him. Michelle Seagraves, who was also an EMT. Dr. Frazier Bowe, who was the ER doctor. And Stephen Jarrett, who was the chaplain in the emergency room.
And did you conduct interviews of those individuals?
Yes, I did.
And did all those take place at Showa Eggleston?
Yes.
Were they recorded?
Yes, they were.
Do you recall the times that those interviews took place?
The first interview with Jennifer Toney took place about 10 o'clock.
That PM?
PM, yes. Michelle Seagraves was about roughly 10:15 p.m. Dr. Frazier Bowe was about 11:10 in the evening, and Stephen Jarrett was around 11:30, I believe.
Okay. And is it Dr. Bowe or Dr. Doe, D-O-H, if you recall?
Bowe.
Okay. Do you recall approximately what time you were able to return back to the precinct?
I believe I arrived at the precinct shortly after midnight.
And do you recall what time the interview with the defendant began?
Right around 12:30.
Okay. And was that interview recorded?
Yes, it was.
And was the defendant Mirandized?
Yes, he was.
And what does that mean?
He was advised of his rights to remain silent and have an attorney and things of that nature.
And how was that information provided to him?
I provided him a copy of a form entitled Statement of Miranda Rights for him to read for himself, while I also read out loud the same form so they could audibly hear it as well.
And was that entire interaction recorded?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And is it typical for other detectives to assist you during your investigation?
Yes, it is.
And was that done in this case?
Yes, it was.
Other than the 4 witnesses that you previously told us about, being Jennifer Toney, Michelle Seagraves, Dr. Frazier Doe, and Stephen Jarrett, what, if any, other witnesses were located and interviewed as part of your investigation into this case?
Other detectives located at the scene, Yolanda Ingram, who was a neighbor. They also located Alicia Nash, who was a neighbor. Jerry Williams, who is the defendant's mother, and Zachary Johnson, who is a co-worker of the defendant.
Was he on scene or was he located later on?
He may have been located later on.
Okay, and did you speak with Zachary Johnson yourself, or did another detective do that interview?
Another detective.
Okay. And do you know if that scene was searched?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and do you know who obtained that search warrant?
Detective Evans.
And all the other reports that were generated by other detectives within your unit, were those made part of your case file?
Yes, they were.
And if I may approach with State's Exhibit 89. Do you recognize what is in State's Exhibit 89?
Yes, this is the statement of Miranda rights that was provided to the defendant.
And that's what you stated you read to the defendant out loud and had him follow along?
That's correct.
And is this a fair and accurate depiction of that document?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd ask to introduce into evidence State's Exhibit 89.
No objection.
Judge, we'll wait to publish that. Based on all the information that was gathered, either by yourself or by the other detectives that you were working in collaboration with, did you obtain any arrest warrants for this defendant?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall what date you obtained those warrants?
I believe I obtained them on the 30th of April.
Okay. And that's 2017, correct?
Yes, correct.
And do you recall what date the defendant was arrested on those warrants?
He was arrested the night of the incident, the 28th of April.
After the arrest of the defendant, did you still happen to receive additional evidence related to this case?
Yes, I did.
Specifically, what, if any, contact did you have with Mario Lemons?
Mario Lemons provided a videotape to other detectives in the unit, and I later, well, not a videotape, a video recording, and I later interviewed Mr. Lemons about the recording.
And was that interview recorded?
Yes, it was.
The defendant, were you able to get his biographical information?
Yes.
And was that made part of your case file?
Yes, it was.
And do you recall his date of birth?
His date of birth is 12/9/1973.
Do you see the defendant in the courtroom today that you conducted that interview with back on April 29th of 2017?
Yes, I do.
And if you could briefly point to him and just describe what he has on.
He's sitting at the defense table wearing a green jacket.
And I apologize if I already asked this, but were you able to obtain the name of the defendant as well?
Yes.
And what was the name?
His name is Leon Harvey Williams.
And at this time, we would ask to reserve further questioning.